This happened back in January of 2017, so not that long ago. I live in a fairly isolated farmhouse in rural Ohio. My parents had gone out of town to visit my aunt in Florida for the week, so I was home alone. I didn't mind it usually. I'm 24 and used to the quiet, but this specific night, the weather was getting bad. The forecast called for an ice storm, and by 8 p.m. it was hitting hard. I could hear the sleet hitting the windows like gravel. It wasn't just snow, it was that heavy, wet ice that clings to everything. Around 9:30 p.m. the inevitable happened. I was in the living room watching YouTube on my TV when everything just snapped off. The sudden silence was immediate. The furnace, the TV, it all just died instantly. I sat there in the dark for a second, waiting to see if it was a flicker, but it stayed off. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to navigate to the kitchen to find the emergency candles and a heavy-duty flashlight we keep in the junk drawer. The atmosphere in the house changed immediately. Because we are so far out in the country, when the lights go out, it is pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And because of the heavy snow and ice outside, the house was dead silent. The snow insulates everything, muffling any noise from the road, which is a mile away anyway. It felt like I was in a vacuum. I sat at the kitchen island, just scrolling on my phone. I had about 60% battery left, and luckily, the cell towers were still working, so I was running on data. I texted my parents to let them know the power was out, and they told me to just bundle up and stay inside. About 20 minutes passed. It was getting colder in the house. That's when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from our smart home security app. Motion detected at the back door. My heart jumped a little, but I tried to be rational. We have a camera pointed at the back deck. Usually it picks up deer or raccoons, especially when they're looking for food in the winter. Or sometimes heavy snow drifting past the sensor can trigger it. I opened the app to check the live feed. The video loaded, but the quality was terrible. Because the power was out, the camera was running on its backup battery, and the Wi-Fi was down, so it was trying to connect via a weak cellular backup signal. The screen was just a mess of gray and white. The night vision was on, but the snow was swirling so hard it was reflecting the infrared light, creating this wall of white static. I squinted, trying to see the deck. I saw a shape, but it was too blurry to make out. It looked like a dark blob standing near the railing, but it could have been a bush blowing in the wind. I tapped the screen to try to refresh the connection. The wheel spun for a second, and then the screen went black. A message popped up, camera offline. I figured the battery had died in the cold, or the signal just couldn't punch through the storm. Still, that dark shape bothered me. I needed to be sure the door was locked. I knew I locked it, but the anxiety made me want to double check. I stood up and walked toward the back of the kitchen. The back door is a sliding glass door that leads out to a wooden deck. I didn't turn my flashlight on because I didn't want to reflect light off the glass and blind myself. I just used the ambient light from my phone screen, which was dim. As I got closer to the door, the temperature dropped. You could feel the cold radiating off the glass. The humidity from the house had created a thick layer of condensation on the inside of the window, so I couldn't see out at all. It was just a foggy, gray rectangle. I reached out to the latch to make sure it was engaged. It was. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just a deer. Then I froze. Right in front of my face, on the other side of the glass, something moved. I watched in absolute horror as a hand pressed against the glass from the outside. I could see the pale skin of the palm and the fingers pressing hard against the surface. The hand moved slowly, wiping away the condensation and frost on the outside of the glass. It wiped a clear circle right at eye level, and then an eye appeared in the cleared circle. I was standing less than a foot away. I was staring directly into a wide, unblinking human eye. It looked manic. The pupil was blown wide open. It wasn't looking around, it was looking right at me. He knew I was standing there. He had been waiting for me to come to the door. I screamed. I scrambled backward, my socks slipping on the hardwood floor, and I fell hard on my hip. I didn't even feel the pain. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted out of the kitchen. I heard a loud thud against the glass door, like he had slammed his body against it, trying to force it off the tracks. I ran to the downstairs bathroom, which is the only room on the first floor with a solid door and no windows. I slammed the door, locked it, and wedged myself between the toilet and the sink. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I dialed 911. The operator answered, but the connection was spotty. I whispered that there was a man at my house trying to get in. I gave her my address, but she told me that road conditions were severe and response time would be delayed. She told me to stay on the line and stay hidden. While I was on the phone, the banging on the back door stopped. The silence returned. That was almost worse. I didn't know if he had given up or if he was finding another way in. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. I was straining my ears, listening for anything over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard it, a heavy, wet, crunching sound. It was footsteps on the front porch. The old wood planks creak, even under snow. He was circling the house. I heard the front door handle jiggle violently. He was rattling it, trying to brute force the lock. I held my breath. I remembered that the deadbolt on the front door was old and a bit loose. Then, a loud crash echoed through the house. It sounded like glass breaking. It came from the living room, the front window. He was inside. 911, he's in the house, I whispered into the phone, my voice trembling. I heard glass break. The operator told me officers were 5 minutes away. 5 minutes is a lifetime when someone is walking through your living room. I heard heavy boots crunching on the broken glass. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. He was stomping. I heard him knock over a lamp. Then I heard a voice. It was rough and sounded like he had been smoking for 40 years. "Come on out, I just want to get warm." The voice was taunting. He was moving toward the hallway that led to the bathroom. I saw the shadow of his feet under the crack of the bathroom door. The light from his flashlight swept past the gap. He stopped right in front of the bathroom door. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle my breathing. The doorknob turned slowly. It clicked against the lock. He rattled it. Then he slammed his shoulder into the door. The wood splintered a little, but it held. "I know you're in there," he mumbled. Just as he hit the door again, I heard sirens. Not the distant kind, but loud, close chirps of a police cruiser pulling into the gravel driveway. The man outside the door stopped. I heard him curse. Damn it. I heard him run back toward the living room. Then, voices are shouting, "Police! Show me your hands!" There was a struggle, the sound of a taser deploying, and then a thud. The police cleared the house and let me out of the bathroom. The man they arrested was a guy named Travis. He was a local drifter who had been released from prison about 2 weeks prior for burglary and aggravated assault. He was high on meth and had been wandering through the woods when he saw my house. The scariest part wasn't just that he tried to break in. When the police checked the footprints in the snow later, they found that he hadn't just walked up to the back door when I got the notification. The tracks showed he had been standing on the back deck for over an hour, just standing in the dark, watching the house, waiting for the power to go out so the cameras would cut off. I moved out of that farmhouse 3 months later. I live in an apartment complex on the 3rd floor now. I don't like ground floor windows anymore, and I definitely don't like the dark. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. A few years ago, back in the winter of 2023, I was working as a delivery driver for DoorDash. I was living in a small town in Minnesota, so the winters were brutal, but that's when the money was best. Nobody wanted to go out in the snow, so the surge pricing would go crazy. It was a Tuesday night in February, and we were in the middle of a serious snowstorm. Visibility was low, and the roads were slick sheets of ice, but I was broke and needed to pay rent, so I decided to stay online until midnight. Around 10:45 p.m. I got a ping for an order. It was a large order from a local steakhouse, and the payout was huge, almost $40 for a 5-mile drive. I accepted it immediately without really looking at the map. I picked up the food, which smelled great, and started following the GPS. It led me away from the town center and out toward the rural outskirts, where the houses are spaced far apart and surrounded by woods. The further I drove, the worse the roads got. By the time I turned onto the customer's street, I was the only car on the road. The snow was coming down heavily, hypnotizing in the headlights. I arrived at the address, and my heart sank. It wasn't a normal house. It was a large two-story colonial set way back from the road. The driveway was at least 100 yards long, winding up a hill, and it hadn't been plowed at all. There was easily a foot of fresh snow covering it. I drove a Honda Civic. There was no way I was getting up there without getting stuck. I texted the customer, "Hey, this is your driver. I can't get up the driveway. Can you meet me at the bottom?" I waited 5 minutes. No response. I called, straight to voicemail. I sighed, frustrated. I didn't want to cancel the order and lose that $40 payout. I figured I would just walk it up. I grabbed the heavy paper bag of food, put my hood up, and started trudging up the driveway. Before I started walking, I checked the delivery instructions again to make sure I wasn't missing a gate code or something. The note was weirdly specific. It read, "Leave at front door. Do not knock or ring the bell. Dogs will bark. Do not look in the windows." The first two parts were normal. People hate waking up their dogs or babies. But the last part, "Do not look in the windows," gave me a weird feeling in my stomach. It felt like a warning you'd see in a horror movie, not a food delivery app. The walk was miserable. The wind was biting my face and the snow was getting into my boots. By the time I saw the house, I was out of breath and freezing. The house was pitch black. No porch light, no lights in the upstairs windows, nothing. It looked completely abandoned. If it weren't for the fresh tire tracks of a car that must have left earlier that day, I would have thought I had the wrong address. I walked up the front steps, which were slippery with ice. I carefully placed the bag of food on the doormat. I took the mandatory proof of delivery photo with the app. As I stood up to leave, I remembered the note. "Do not look in the windows." Naturally, that made me want to look. To the right of the front door was a massive bay window. It jutted out from the living room. There were no curtains or blinds. It was just a giant sheet of glass. I couldn't help it. I glanced over. The living room was completely empty. I mean, totally bare. No couch, no TV, no rugs, no lamps. It was just an empty room with hardwood floors, except for the middle of the room. Standing dead center in the living room was a mannequin. It was a male mannequin wearing a gray suit. It wasn't posing, it was just standing there stiff with its arms at its sides. It was facing the window, facing me. It was startling, but I told myself it was just some weird art project, or maybe the people were moving in and using it for storage. But it creeped me out. It felt like it was watching me, even though it had no face, just a smooth plastic oval head. I turned around quickly, wanting to get out of there. The vibe was all wrong. The silence of the woods, the dark house, the weird instruction, it was too much. I started walking fast down the steps. "Just get to the car," I said to myself. I hit the bottom step and my boot found a patch of black ice hidden under the snow. My feet flew out from under me and I slammed hard onto the driveway. "Ow!" I groaned, rubbing my elbow. I sat there for a second in the snow, gathering my bearings. I was embarrassed, hoping nobody saw me wipe out. I stood up and brushed the snow off my pants. Instinctively, I looked back at the house to see if a light had flickered on, thinking the noise of my fall might have alerted the owner. The house was still dark, but my blood ran cold. I looked at the bay window again. The mannequin wasn't in the middle of the room anymore. It was standing right against the glass. It was pressed up against the window, looming over the porch. It hadn't just tipped over. It was upright, its plastic forehead touching the pane. It was looking down at where I had just been standing on the porch. I froze for maybe half a second, my brain trying to process how a plastic doll could cover 20 feet of distance in the 5 seconds I was on the ground. Then, pure adrenaline took over. I didn't scream, I just ran. I sprinted down that unplowed driveway, knees high, slipping and sliding in the deep snow. I didn't look back. I felt like someone was right behind me, reaching for my hood. I got to my car, threw the door open, and locked it the second I was inside. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them on the floor mat. I scrambled to grab them, jammed the key in the ignition, and peeled out of there. I almost slid into a ditch turning around, but I didn't care. I drove 5 miles over the speed limit until I was back on the main road with streetlights. I called support and told them I felt unsafe at the drop-off, but I didn't tell them about the mannequin because I knew how crazy it sounded. I just said it was unlit and dangerous ice. A few days later, I drove past that road during the day, just to see if the house looked different. There was a for sale sign at the end of the driveway. It looked old and weathered. I looked up the address on Zillow when I got home. The listing said the house had been vacant and on the market for over a year. The photos showed the same empty living room. I don't know who or what ordered that steak dinner, and I don't know how a mannequin moves across a room on its own, but I never delivered to that side of town again. I was driving along Interstate 80 through Wyoming, trying to get home for the holidays, when the weather turned on me. It started as a light flurry, but within 20 minutes, it was a total whiteout. I couldn't see the hood of my own car, let alone the lines on the road. I wasn't the only one struggling. Ahead of me, brake lights were flashing like crazy, and then everything just stopped. A semi-truck had jackknifed across both lanes about a mile up, and traffic came to a dead standstill. I sat there for the first hour with the radio on, thinking it would clear up. It didn't. The snow kept piling up, burying the tires beneath it. By midnight, I had been sitting in the same spot for 4 hours. I was terrified of running out of gas, so I started a routine. I'd run the engine for 10 minutes to blast the heat, then shut it off for 45 minutes to save fuel. It wasn't very nice. As soon as the engine cut off, the temperature inside the car plummeted. I was wearing my winter coat, a hat, and gloves, and I was still shivering. The highway was eerie. It was packed with cars, but it was silent. Most people had turned their lights off to save their batteries. It looked like a graveyard of buried vehicles. To my left was a concrete divider. To my right was a rusted, dark green sedan. It looked like an older Honda. The windows were dark, and I hadn't seen the engine turn on in hours. Snow was piled high on the roof and hood. I figured the driver was either asleep or their battery had died, and they were just freezing in there. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept checking my phone, but the service was dead in this dead zone of the highway. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I was awake, rubbing my hands together to keep the circulation going. That's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The driver's door of the green Honda next to me creaked open. I sat up a little straighter. The wind was howling outside, easily 30 miles per hour, and the temperature was well below zero. A man stepped out of the Honda. He looked completely out of place. He was wearing a faded graphic t-shirt and jeans, no coat, no hat, no gloves. He stepped right into the shin-deep snow in canvas sneakers. I watched him, confused. I thought maybe his car had broken down and he was coming to ask for a jump start. But he didn't look at me. He walked toward the car in front of the Honda, a large SUV. He reached out and grabbed the door handle. He pulled on it gently. It was locked. He didn't knock on the window. He didn't wave his arms. He just let go and moved to the next car, a pickup truck. He tried the handle, locked. He was moving methodically, checking for an unlocked door. The weirdest part was his body language. He wasn't hunched over against the wind. He was standing straight up, walking casually, like he was strolling through a mall, not a blizzard. After checking 3 cars and finding them locked, he turned around and walked back toward me. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I made sure my doors were locked. I pressed the lock button down again, just to be sure. He walked right up to my driver's side window. I flinched back toward the passenger seat. The snow was swirling around him, but I could see his face perfectly in the reflection of my dashboard lights. He was smiling. It was a wide, unnatural grin that showed too many teeth. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring right through the glass at me. He didn't say anything. Instead, he lifted a piece of cardboard he was holding. It looked like the lid of a pizza box with grease stains on it. Written on the cardboard in thick black marker were the words, "Let me in. I'm cold." I stared at the sign, then back at his face. He wasn't shivering. That was the thing that made my stomach drop. It was negative 10 degrees out there. I was shivering inside my car with a coat on. This guy was in a t-shirt, and he wasn't shaking. His skin wasn't pale or blue. He looked perfectly comfortable. He tapped on the glass with his finger. He just kept smiling. He moved the sign closer to the window. "Let me in." I'm cold. I shook my head violently. No. I said, even though I knew he couldn't hear me over the wind. Get away. He didn't look angry. He just tilted his head like he was observing a fish in a tank. He reached down and grabbed my door handle. He pulled up on it. It clicked, but the lock held. He didn't pull again. He just let go. Looked at me one last time with that frozen smile and lowered the sign. Then, without any urgency, he turned around and walked back to his green Honda. He opened the door, got in, and shut it. I grabbed the tire iron from my back seat and sat there for the rest of the night, staring at that car. I never saw him move again. I never saw the car turn on. When the sun came up around 7 a.m., the plows finally broke through. A highway patrol officer was walking down the line of cars, checking on people. I rolled down my window as he approached. I was exhausted and shaking from adrenaline. "Officer," I said, pointing to the green Honda, the guy in that car next to me. "He's dangerous. He was trying to get into my car last night." The officer looked at the Honda. It was completely buried in snow now. "That one? Yes. He got out around 2 a.m. He was wearing a t-shirt. He's crazy." The officer frowned. He walked over to the Honda. He wiped the snow off the driver's side window and peered in. Then he tried the handle. It was unlocked. He opened the door. I leaned forward to look. The car was empty. "There's nobody in here," the officer said, looking around the interior. "No keys in the ignition either." "He has to be," I insisted. I watched him get in. The officer checked the registration in the glove box. He came back to my window a few minutes later. "This car was reported stolen 3 days ago from a pizza delivery driver in Omaha," the officer said. "Looks like whoever took it ran it out of gas and ditched it when the traffic stopped. If he was walking around in a t-shirt last night, he's probably frozen to death in the woods by now. They never found a body, but I know what I saw. I know he wasn't shivering."
On the night of April 18th, 2021, at around 7:40 p.m., an Australian man named Mitch Cooney was driving down the Hume Highway in Bardia, Australia. He was returning from a racing event and heading home to Gold Coast City when, completely out of nowhere, he saw a childlike figure standing in the middle of the road. The figure was wearing a blue parka, and from the few seconds he was in view, it looked like he was trying to cross the highway. Now, Mitch was driving at nearly 60 miles an hour, or around 96 kilometers per hour. He was also towing a large toy hauler behind his car. Trying to brake or suddenly move out of the way in these conditions would have certainly resulted in a devastating accident, so Mitch had no choice but to keep driving. Fortunately, he managed to avoid the mysterious figure by mere inches. Fearing the safety of a potential child wandering the Hume Highway, his mother, who was also with him at the time, contacted the Australian police almost seconds later. The officers online assured them that they were putting patrols out immediately. However, Mitch could